Charles Schwab just released an educational video telling their clients $12 trillion in client assets that an aggressive investor might be comfortable with up to 20% of their portfolio's risk in Bitcoin. That translates to nearly 7% of total portfolio value in crypto. For moderate investors, the recommendation is approximately 2.7%. Pause on that for a second. Charles Schwab, $12 trillion in client assets, publicly recommending that their clients consider crypto allocations in the 2% to 7% range as part of a balanced portfolio. This is not 2017. This is not 2021. This is the most conservative mainstream brokerage in America, providing educational materials that position crypto as a legitimate portfolio component worthy of meaningful allocation. The Overton window on institutional crypto acceptance has shifted so dramatically that what would have been heretical investment advice 5 years ago is now official Schwab guidance to 34 million client accounts. And Schwab isn't alone. BlackRock's head of digital assets is on Fox Business, telling investors that Bitcoin and crypto are long-term investments that belong in portfolios. Morgan Stanley just approved XRP for their 15,000 financial advisors. The White House is signaling that a crypto reserve announcement is coming in the next few weeks. The SEC chair is publicly describing an advance, clarify, transform strategy for digital asset regulation. Every single piece of the institutional adoption machinery that XRP holders have been waiting for is activating simultaneously, not in isolation, not in sequence, simultaneously. Today, I'm going to walk you through the significance of Schwab's recommendation, what the coming strategic crypto reserve announcement could mean, why the SEC's explicit shift from enforcement to engagement matters more than most retail investors realize, how the stablecoin war that's about to erupt affects RLUSD's positioning, and why the combination of all these developments represents an institutional acceptance threshold that fundamentally changes how XRP should be valued going forward. Because when we finish, you'll understand that the question is no longer whether institutional adoption happens. It's happening. The question is how much of it flows through XRP specifically, and what that means for the price over the next 12 to 36 months. This is not financial advice. I'm sharing publicly available information for educational purposes. Always do your own research before we get into it. Drop Schwab in the comments if the 2.7% to 7% recommendation from Charles Schwab changed how you think about institutional positioning. Drop reserve if the White House crypto reserve announcement is what has your attention most. Drop all of it if you see these developments as pieces of one connected acceptance cascade. Because the cascade is real, and understanding it as a cascade rather than as isolated events determines how you position from here. Welcome back. I am the Calm Analyst. Around here, we decode what institutional acceptance actually means in operational terms. Today, we're connecting Schwab's allocation guidance to BlackRock's bullish posture, to the White House reserve announcement, to the SEC's transformation strategy, to Morgan Stanley's wealth management activation, to the stablecoin landscape shift. Every piece fits together. And the combined picture is the most significant institutional acceptance cascade crypto has ever experienced. Well, let's get into it. Let me start with Schwab's recommendation. Because the mechanics of how brokerage allocation guidance translates to capital flows are worth understanding. Charles Schwab manages approximately $12 trillion in client assets across 34 million accounts. When Schwab publishes educational materials suggesting that crypto allocations in the 2.7% to 7% range are appropriate for moderate to aggressive investors, that guidance flows through every Schwab financial advisor and every self-directed client who reads their educational content. If Schwab's aggregate client base were to shift even 1% of their assets into crypto based on this guidance, that's 120 billion in new institutional flow. If 3% shifts, which aligns with their moderate recommendation, that's 360 billion. These numbers are staggering relative to the current total crypto market capitalization. And this is before considering that Schwab is one of many. Fidelity, with $4.9 trillion in assets, has been expanding their crypto services. Vanguard, with $9.3 trillion, has been more conservative, but is facing competitive pressure to reconsider. Morgan Stanley, with $5.5 trillion in wealth management, just approved XRP specifically for their 15,000 financial advisors. Charles Schwab, $12 trillion. Goldman Sachs, trillion plus in various businesses with 153.8 million already in XRP ETFs. Combined, these major institutions manage tens of trillions in client assets. Even small allocation shifts across this cohort produce capital flows that overwhelm current crypto market capacity. And the shifts are happening now, not someday, not eventually, but in the current quarter as these institutions update their guidance and their advisor training materials. For XRP specifically, the allocation conversation matters because XRP is now included in the institutional-grade crypto universe that these brokerages can recommend. 7-spot XRP ETFs provide the distribution vehicle. The commodity classification provides the regulatory basis. Morgan Stanley's wealth management approval provides the specific product integration. Schwab's allocation guidance provides the framework that positions XRP as a legitimate portfolio component. If the scale of aggregate institutional allocation just reframed the demand picture for you, smash that like button. Because this is the capital that the infrastructure thesis has been built to absorb. Now let me address the White House crypto reserve announcement, because the timing and content of this announcement matter enormously. The head of crypto at the White House indicated that an announcement about crypto and digital asset reserves is coming in the next few weeks or next month or two. The phrasing itself is worth dissecting. Next few weeks or next month or two is administrative language for we have something coming, but we're not confirming exact timing yet. That typically indicates the announcement is in preparation and will arrive when specific conditions align, likely following the CLARITY Act passage, the Senate confirmation of key nominees, or other policy milestones. The question everyone in the XRP community wants answered is whether the reserve will include XRP, Solana, ADA, or other altcoins alongside Bitcoin. Trump's earlier statements suggested a broader crypto reserve concept that would include multiple assets. More recent executive orders focus primarily on Bitcoin. The actual content of the coming announcement will reveal how that tension has been resolved. Here's the honest assessment. A Bitcoin-only reserve is easier politically because Bitcoin has the broadest recognition, the longest track record, and the fewest regulatory complications. A multi-asset reserve, including XRP, Solana, and other commodity-classified assets, is more aligned with actual American crypto industry interests, but harder to communicate to traditional financial stakeholders. What would XRP inclusion in a US strategic reserve mean? The signaling effect would be enormous. A US government allocation to XRP would validate the asset at the highest sovereign level, encourage other central banks to consider their own allocations, accelerate institutional adoption timelines, and provide a regulatory benchmark that foreign jurisdictions would likely follow. Even if XRP isn't included in the initial reserve announcement, the broader framework being established that the US government views digital assets as strategic reserves worth acquiring creates a policy precedent that expands over time. A Bitcoin-only reserve today could include Ethereum in 2027, could include XRP in 2028 or 2029, could include additional assets as the institutional framework matures. The calm reading is that XRP benefits from any strategic crypto reserve, regardless of whether it's included initially, because the framework itself validates digital assets as legitimate sovereign holdings. And the probability of XRP eventually being included in US reserve frameworks increases as the CLARITY Act solidifies its commodity status and as its infrastructure integration deepens. Comment below. Do you expect XRP to be included in the initial US strategic crypto reserve? Type yes if you think the announcement will include XRP. Type no if you think it's Bitcoin only initially. Type eventually if you think XRP is added later. Because how you calibrate this expectation affects how much weight you give the coming announcement. Now let me address the SEC's Advance, Clarify, Transform strategy. Because SEC Chair Paul Atkins's public positioning represents a complete reversal from the Gensler era. Atkins described the SEC's new approach as three-part. Advance, modernize the approach to new technologies rather than fending them off, and bring back innovators who fled offshore. Clarify, provide transparency about how the SEC approaches crypto and other technologies, in coordination with the CFTC. Transform, make the rulebook fit for purpose so that innovation can flourish. This is diametrically opposite to the enforcement-focused approach that characterized the Gensler SEC. The Gensler approach treated crypto as presumptively illegal until proven otherwise, used enforcement actions as primary policy tools, and created an environment where legitimate innovators fled to more permissive jurisdictions. The Atkins approach explicitly rejects regulation through enforcement. It focuses on clarifying rules, coordinating with other agencies, and creating frameworks that enable compliant innovation. The result is that American crypto companies no longer face existential regulatory risk from their home country's primary securities regulator. And the innovators who fled to Switzerland, Singapore, Dubai, and other permissive jurisdictions can now consider returning to the US. For XRP specifically, this regulatory transformation is foundational. The SEC's enforcement action against Ripple defined the previous era. The settlement, the commodity classification, and now the SEC's active coordination with the CFTC on tokenized securities definition have completely inverted XRP's regulatory environment, from primary defendant to participating member of the new regulatory framework. The operational implications extend beyond XRP itself. Every bank, financial institution, and corporation that was hesitant to engage with XRP during the SEC lawsuit era can now engage with confidence. The regulatory risk that suppressed institutional adoption for years has been replaced with regulatory support that accelerates it. And the 7 ETFs, Morgan Stanley approval, and Schwab allocation guidance are all downstream effects of this regulatory transformation. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Drop a in the comments. Because the SEC's transformation is the regulatory foundation that everything else builds on. And tracking each new SEC statement, each new CFTC coordination announcement, and each new framework development is essential for understanding how the institutional cascade accelerates. Now let me address the stablecoin war, because this is the dimension that directly affects RLUSD's positioning and, by extension, XRP's auto-bridging demand. Mike Belshi of BitKit described the coming stablecoin landscape. Because traditional stablecoin issuers don't pass interest to depositors, every major platform has an incentive to issue their own stablecoin to capture that interest internally. The result will be an explosion of stablecoins from SoFi, traditional finance firms, payment processors, and other major institutions. Competition will intensify, and eventually, the dominant stablecoin will be whoever passes through the most interest efficiently. like an ETF, while maintaining quality and liquidity. This matters for XRP because RLUSD enters this competitive landscape with specific advantages: BNY Mellon custody, BlackRock integration through Buidal settlement, Ripple's global regulatory licenses, and the XRP ledger's native infrastructure for auto bridging, which makes RLUSD transactions inherently require XRP as the liquidity bridge. In a fragmented stablecoin world where dozens of issuers compete, RLUSD's position as one of the institutionally integrated options becomes more valuable. It doesn't need to win the entire stablecoin market to benefit XRP. It needs to capture enough institutional settlement volume that XRP's auto-bridging role generates meaningful transaction demand. And when interest-bearing stablecoins become permitted under the evolving regulatory framework, the competitive dynamics shift again. The stablecoin that most efficiently passes through yield becomes dominant. RLUSD's integration with Ripple Treasury and the institutional infrastructure positions it to compete in that eventual state. The immediate implication for XRP is that the stablecoin war increases overall stablecoin volume, which increases overall tokenized asset activity, which increases demand for the settlement infrastructure that moves tokenized value across platforms. XRP Ledger sits at the center of that settlement function. More stablecoin activity means more XRP demand, regardless of which specific stablecoin dominates individual corridors. Now let me address the AI agent thesis through Palantir's framing, because this connects back to why XRP's architecture matters specifically. Joe Lonsdale, co-founder of Palantir, stated that AI agents are going to do a lot of things in our economy and will need crypto to coordinate with incentive systems. He specifically mentioned Ethereum, Solana, and other networks as likely infrastructure, notably not Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a store of value asset rather than a transactional infrastructure. The XRP ledger provides exactly the characteristics that AI agents require for transactional infrastructure: sub 5-second finality, fractional cent transaction costs, 24/7 365 operational availability, censorship resistance because XRP cannot be frozen by any central party, predictable throughput without smart contract complexity that could create AI exploitable vulnerabilities. When autonomous AI agents begin transacting at scale, which A16Z and Circle leadership describe as imminent rather than distant, the settlement infrastructure they use needs these characteristics. Ethereum handles the smart contract logic layer. Solana handles high-throughput transactions. The XRP ledger handles the settlement layer, where finality and predictability matter most. Evernorth is already building AI agent finance on the XRP ledger through their T54 partnership. The architecture for AI-driven treasury management is operational. As the AI agent economy scales through 2026 and beyond, the XRP ledger captures a specific share of that transaction volume based on its architectural suitability for the settlement function. Let me bring this all together, because the institutional acceptance cascade converging right now represents a phase change that the price chart doesn't yet reflect. Schwab's $12 trillion platform publishes 2.7% to 7% crypto allocation guidance. BlackRock's digital assets head publicly endorses crypto as long-term investments. Morgan Stanley approves XRP for 15,000 wealth advisors. The White House signals a strategic crypto reserve announcement in coming weeks. SEC Chair Atkins describes the advanced Clarify Transform framework that positions regulation as innovation supportive. The stablecoin war is about to explode with multiple major issuers entering the market. AI agents are beginning to transact on blockchain infrastructure at scale. Every single one of these developments is happening now, not in 2027 not in 2030. Now, in the current quarter, and every single one of them either directly benefits XRP or creates conditions that amplify XRP's existing advantages. The allocation numbers matter most. If the major US brokerages genuinely implement the crypto allocation guidance they're publishing, the capital flow into crypto markets over the next 12 to 24 months will exceed anything crypto has ever experienced. Not by a small margin, by orders of magnitude. XRP, positioned as a top-tier digital asset with commodity classification, 7 ETFs, wealth management approval, and institutional infrastructure backing, captures a specific share of that flow. That share doesn't need to be majority. A meaningful minority of the flow is sufficient to produce the price repricing that analyst models have been projecting. Standard Chartered's $2.80 base case and $8 bull case for 2026 are not aggressive projections. They're the logical outputs of the institutional flow scenarios that the current acceptance cascade enables. The 2030 target of $28 is the multi-year extension of that flow, materializing as institutional mandates, update and wealth management distribution compounds, and the infrastructure we've been tracking for months. Ripple Treasury, SWIFT certification, CBDC deployments, Rakuten integration, Singapore expansion, tokenization partnerships, converts the institutional capital flow into sustained transaction demand that justifies ongoing price appreciation rather than speculative spikes. The current price of 1.47 reflects the market's uncertainty about whether this cascade is real. The infrastructure build-out, the regulatory transformation, the allocation guidance, and the accelerating institutional adoption collectively answer that question. The cascade is real. The conversion from announcements to capital flows takes months, and the people positioned before that conversion completes capture the majority of the asymmetry. Price is a distraction. Value is the reality. Structure is what matters. And the structure that's been assembled in the last 18 months, Schwab allocation guidance, BlackRock endorsement, Morgan Stanley approval, SEC transformation, White House reserve planning, stablecoin infrastructure maturation, AI agent preparation, is the structure of an institutional acceptance cascade that fundamentally changes how digital assets are integrated into traditional finance. XRP sits at the intersection of every dimension of this cascade. The infrastructure is built. The regulatory clarity is arriving. The distribution channels are open. The capital is beginning to flow. And the price is still trading as if none of this is happening. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Remember, haste leads to loss, while calm analysis leads to victory. Comment, calm analyst below, and tell me honestly, does the scale of the institutional acceptance cascade change how you're thinking about your XRP positioning? Type yes if the cascade framework shifted your expectations. Type already positioned if you anticipated this. Type skeptical if you need more evidence before you believe it. All three responses are valid, but the framework we've built today should inform how you read every incoming catalyst from here. Like, subscribe, notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay patient, stay rational, and as we always do, we don't wait for the future. We plan for it.